I wanted to chat with you first because it seems like you're an Indiana Jones guy, which I am also as well. Oh, you good? Oh my God. Is that all just Indiana Jones posters?
The original vinyl uh, from the movie over here, and then it's a reprint of the original poster.
Are you a Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, or Last Crusade guy? Which one could you watch on repeat?
Raiders is my favorite movie ever, so that's kind of the. I can watch Last Crusade probably a million times in a row. I could die a happy person.
My next door neighbor used to be a director, and he had a fedora from the Last Crusade giveaway, like when they used to give away things on premieres. I had it, and I didn't appreciate it. I ruined it. I'm a terrible person, but I used to wear it all the time.
Clearly, why am I here?
I know. I know. Just leave now. I'm so sorry. Out of the Carolina Panthers beat reporters, minus like maybe Jordan Rodriguez, like you're so engaged with like the other content creators and the Twitter people. Like, why is that, or where does that come from?
I come from Philly, so like I covered the Eagles before I was a beat writer. I covered uh, the Eagles eventually again in my career. And when I started as a beat writer, I started in Jacksonville, and I would say that there was like a void in the market of like people who could just readily give you information. The newspaper writers just wrote newspaper articles. I was in a unique role because I came in and I was hired by a TV station. As you know, it's very rare to have a lot of people who solely contribute to web from a sports perspective. And so I carved out my own role. I also just kind of believe if you can't have fun with this job and you can't connect with people, then what's the point, right? Like it's not like we're covering the most important things in life, but we're there to provide analysis and entertainment for folks that are looking for an escape. And I think if you take yourself too seriously in this job, you should take the job seriously, but you shouldn't take yourself too seriously. And I think my job is to provide you with information. If you have a question and I can answer it, I'm happy to do it.
Everyone's obviously focused at number one. It seems like we won't spend too much time because I know people are kind of bored of it. But it seems like Bryce is kind of leading the charge, like betting wise. I don't know if you're a betting man. He's at like minus 1,800 now to be picked first overall. Without obviously giving too much away, like what are you hearing right now about where the Panthers could possibly be leading next Thursday?
It's interesting. I see this national narrative that like it's always been Bryce, and based on my reporting and what I was told leading up throughout the offseason, that's not necessarily truly the case. A lot of people want to deflect and say that CJ Stroud was just a size narrative, but I think locally we've all been pretty fair with that. I do think there's been genuine interest in CJ Stroud. If I had to guess, if they're deciding between two guys, it's Stroud and Young. But I do think, yes, like you said, there does feel like there's a lot of momentum. And momentum can mean a lot of things, in my opinion. I mean, it's a matter of perspective. A lot of people have taken that as, oh, he wasn't the guy, but now he is. No, I just think heading into this process, they kept an open mind. And even if Young was the favorite to begin with, which I'm not saying he was because I don't know that, I do think that he has made up so much ground, whether he was in the lead or not. I mean, it does kind of feel like he's kind of pulling away. He does a terrific job on the board. He's very genuine. A lot of people gave the Teppers flack for having Nicole involved in this search. I mean, women's intuition is really important in these interviews, and I think I can only speak for experience with my wife, but she's normally very good at pointing out when somebody comes off fake or phony or whatever. And I think that that's really important. I think the person aspect of this, especially when you're going to take somebody as the first overall pick, is really important. If you rewind back to when Frank Reich got hired, part of the reason why he was able to distinguish himself is he was more than just a head coach. He was a guy that understood marketing. He understood media. He understood the different avenues of a team where he could be a CEO. And that's kind of what a quarterback becomes eventually. And I think they're investing a lot in this pick. I'm a big believer that if you trade up to get the first overall pick, you're doing so with the thought process that this guy's going to last 2 contracts. And if you're okay with his frame and think he can survive, 8 years in the league, then you make the pick. I mean, I do think there's some legitimacy to concern about his frame. I think the height is not a problem whatsoever. If you watch him, he's got an extremely high release. He sees he sees passing lanes extremely well, better than some guys that are 6'2", 6'3". He's unquestionably talented. It's just a matter of whether you think he can hold up for the long run. Because if you draft a guy and he turns out to be Jake Locker and only plays 5 years, it doesn't matter really how good he plays if you don't win a Super Bowl.
Are we in a fine line where do you think they'd want to have him pack on a couple pounds, or would he become kind of the way Russell Wilson is now? He's kind of built like a boxer, kind of like an MMA fighter, and he's kind of also kind of muscle bound, it seems. Like, do you think they'd want to add a couple pounds just to make him a bit more durable, or just kind of keep him the way he is?
I think playing at 200 to 204 is a really good weight for him. I don't think it's necessary to bulk him up like Russell. Drew Brees was not a big, bulky guy. And that's the guy he's kind of been compared to a lot. I mean, even tall guys, like I always get weirded out when people talk about tall guys being more durable or what have you, because a lot of those guys are really skinny. Like Jared Goff's a really skinny player. He's not Carson Wentz. So, excuse me. I think, it's a matter of your personal evaluation, and he's an outlier. And so how do you process outliers? Yeah, he is a very good processor. And you'll notice in my commentary a lot of the time in my analysis, I focus very heavily on process. The Panthers have had a great process here. I think you have to you trade up because you know a guy is worthy of number 1 or 2, or 2 guys are worth number 1. But then you keep an open mind, and sometimes people can surprise you. That happens in job interviews all the time. I've interviewed for positions where I didn't think I was going to get the job, and then, I've said some stuff that has opened the door, and vice versa. I mean, I've been on the hiring side of things and been blown away by a candidate who I didn't think I was going to be blown away by.
I think is more likely that they stick and pick at 39 or trade back and try to get a haul. What are you hearing?
I think it depends on who's there, right? Like, I know that sounds like a cop-out answer, but I think, if they can get an edge rusher who they feel like can become an immediate asset for them, I think they will stay there. I think if there's a corner like Cam Smith who they feel like they can plug in and he's an upgrade over CJ and Dante, they'll go there. If a wide receiver drops like Quentin Johnston or, somebody of that ilk, Jalen Hyatt, right? Hyatt. If one of those 2 guys maybe drops, they'll have some interest. But I do think 39 is a really smart asset to move if you can. I mean, here's the thing, though. You only really trade back unless you can get another 3 or a 2024 second out of the deal. Because if you're moving back, you're going from like a potential first round, runoff player to a guy who could be a second or third round pick, right? And so I think you have to play that market really well. And I think when we look at this quarterback class, if 4 or 5 guys go in the first round, the asset isn't as important. It's not like nobody's trading up for a quarterback at 39. They're probably trading up at 32 or 33. Right after a day of resetting their board and figuring out what the value is. So I think they have to be smart. I wouldn't trade beyond 55, and you would have to get a this year 3rd round or next year 2nd round out of it, which would be smart because obviously they don't have a first round pick next year. I still think they're probably only going to have 6 to 7 picks in this draft. And that's kind of how I would do it because undrafted free agency, they're going to have a lot of options. I think right now they only have 64 players on their roster, and Sam Franklin hasn't signed his restricted tender. So, like, if they get to 65, you have 25 players you're going to sign. That's 19 undrafted free agents and the 6 draft picks that they have. So, Anyway, I guess I'm kind of rambling there, but I do think 39 makes sense. 93 is really not going to get you the return that you want. 93 is probably going to get you an extra, fifth round pick and a seventh round pick. So if you're looking to add lottery tickets and avoid a mad dash in free agent or undrafted free agency, I get it. But you got to be smart. You can't just trade back to trade back.
Like you mentioned edge and wide receiver. I'm kind of hot and heavy about this tight end class, but should I just reserve my love and passion for some of these guys? Just like the sheer, I just like, maybe it's the body beautiful thing. Maybe I'm projecting. I wish I was built like these guys and had their height, speed, and strength, like Luke Musgraves, who I know has a bit battered up, but he just like the things that he could probably do on the field. But is the acquisition of Hayden Hurst and Tommy Tremble, I've always liked. Like I liked him out of Notre Dame, and I thought he showed us a lot of promise, in my opinion, so far since he's been a pro. Are they now probably gonna not look at this tight end class and just focus on, like you said, like an edge, maybe a corner, and a wide receiver?
I think they could look at tight end, but the tight end class is really deep. I think you can get a quality long term player in the third or fourth round. Durham Payne is a guy who I really like. Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion. Like there are guys in this draft that you can. I mean, Latu from Alabama. I think you can get him in the fourth round. So like, I don't think it's a priority for them right now, but I mean, look, you never know if like Dalton Kincaid somehow falls down to the second to 39, right? Like then there's a conversation to be had. But I think, excuse me, I think corner, edge, and really five technique are the three positions that they need to address on defense. And in a lot of my mock drafts, I'm going either edge or five technique because that defensive line is not. I mean, it's got bodies, right? But really, outside of Derek Brown and Shai Tuttle, I don't know if you could say you have like legitimate frontline starters. And they brought in Deshaun Williams, who is a local guy who worked under Ejiro Evero last year, but they signed him for basically the veteran minimum with a really nice bonus. And I mean, I think he's going to face competition in training camp, so you've got to create the competition.
Is there like a late round, like we talked about lottery ticket? Is there like a lottery ticket late round guy you think could maybe make a splash if the Panthers do pick him up in like day 2, 3?
You brought up tight ends. Will Mallory's a guy who's being projected as a sixth or seventh round pick. He actually played for Thomas Brown as a true freshman at Miami when he was the offensive coordinator there. I'm trying to think. Like my brain is like not working this morning. At wide receiver, A.T. Perry, who played at Wake Forest, he's been projected like all over the board. I've seen him as a second round pick. I've seen him as a third round pick. I've seen him as a fifth round pick. He's interesting. Garrett Williams is a guy who I just turned in a story for. He's from North Carolina. Really tough corner. Reminds me a lot of Steven Nelson. He's a guy that I could see being like a really good long-term nickel corner. He's probably going to go in the third or fourth round. Nick Saldiveri is a guy that I just did a story on who I've learned a lot about by talking to scouts. He's a guy who's got a lot of versatility. I like him a lot. I'm trying to think. Off the top of the dome. Running. I mean, I brought up Durham Payne earlier. He really impressed me at the Senior Bowl. Had probably the play of the practice week. Caught a touchdown on a really nice U route, and his helmet got knocked off. Held on to the catch. I like Sidney Brown from Illinois. He was impressive. I'm trying to think of other guys that like off the top of my head for the Panthers at least. Jonathan Mingo's a guy from Ole Miss who's climbing up boards. I just saw Peter Schrager had him in the first round, which is kind of wild because I was told that he was probably going to be a third or fourth round pick. Well, he's got like kind of AJ Brown, DK Metcalf energy, right? Like he's a guy who's got size and speed, and he comes from Ole Miss, and he puts up big numbers, and he's this and that. And I think that's kind of, the interesting thing. There's Bryce Ford Wheaton. Okay, here. Let's talk about Bryce Ford Wheaton because he's fun. I always tend to fall in love with a West Virginia wide receiver just based on tape. I don't know if it's because they have cool uniforms or what, but the dude's like built like a tree and he can run like a 4.43, and those are the type of like lottery tickets you want to turn in, you know what I mean? I think he makes a lot of sense for them if they pass on a wide receiver in the first 4 rounds. So there is LaDainian Tomlinson's nephew, the nickel corner from TCU, who I think would be a really good long-term fit.
Well, going into this meeting with Fitter and Dan Morgan, are there some things you want to get off your chest and ask him before? Can you give us a preview on what maybe your list of questions are going to be?
I mean, I think it's interesting that they have Will Levis and CJ Stroud in the building while they're doing this media thing. I mean, in one sense, it'd be a really great smokescreen to show, like, hey, maybe they're not that interested. In another sense, it's a good test of their character and their will to know, like, hey, look, the GM's not going to be around all day. I think when you have two guys, they're going to be meeting. They're going to do round robin meetings with like the entire organization. This is not going to be like. I don't think that they're projecting like, hey, these meetings don't matter just because these guys took a noon lunch press conference. You know what I mean? I think there's going to be a rush to judgment there. Matt Corral is going to be a big one. We talked about outliers with Bryce. I'm going to ask Dan and Cole Spencer, their head of college scouting, what's your philosophy on outliers? But I don't want to give it all away because I kind of not that they're like jumping on the internet and being like, hey, what's Mike Kaye say? But I think the element of surprise is important in some of these press conferences, and you don't want to prep them. But what I would say is I do think a lot of the questions that you asked would make sense in those press conferences. What's the deal for Miles Sanders? How does tight end get affected by Hayden Hurst? I mean, these are important questions. Do they still feel like they have a wide receiver need? Like there are a lot of questions that are going to be asked in this press conference. I'm sure my colleagues will bring their best stuff. I will do my darndest to be a conduit to you guys and help you guys understand what the process is. But I expect this to be pretty guarded.